It started like any regular morning. Birds chirping, coffee brewing, the kind of peace you expect in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I was getting ready to leave for work when something strange caught my eye from the front window. There was a massive semi-truck parked right across the road leading to my house. At first, I thought it was just a delivery truck turning around, or maybe lost. But it didn't move. 10 minutes passed, then 20, still there, blocking the only way in and out of my driveway. I stepped outside, a little confused but calm. The truck wasn't just idling, it was completely shut off, like it was parked there on purpose. That's when I saw her, the new neighbor, the one everyone had been quietly whispering about since she moved in. People called her Karen behind closed doors, not just because of the name, but the attitude that came with it. Arms crossed, sunglasses on, standing there like she owned the entire street. I walked up to her and asked if she knew why a semi was blocking the road. She didn't miss a beat. "That's HOA property now," she said flatly, like that explained everything. I blinked. "What?" I asked, thinking maybe I misheard her. But she repeated it, slower this time, like I was a child. "This road, it's under the HOA. You're trespassing every time you drive on it. Now, I've lived here for almost 10 years, paid property taxes, mowed that stretch of grass next to the curb myself. Never once did anyone, including the HOA, claim that the road didn't belong to the city or that it wasn't public access. And even if it were part of an HOA easement or something technical like that, no one has the right to block access to a person's house with a semi. But Karen stood her ground, said the board met, had a vote, and decided the road was now private property controlled by the HOA. No paperwork, no letters, just a vote no one else seemed to know about. And the truck, that was her way of enforcing it. At this point, I wasn't even angry. I was stunned. I mean, who does that? Who hires a semi-truck to park in the middle of a residential road just to prove a point? I pulled out my phone, took a few photos, and asked her again to move it. She smirked and said, "Go ahead. Call the police. They won't do anything. It's HOA land now." Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Surely the HOA would step in, right? Or the police, or someone with common sense. But here's where things got even more twisted. The people on the HOA board, a few of them were her friends, newly elected, recently moved in, and apparently very supportive of her tactics. It wasn't just about the truck. This was about control, about someone trying to change the rules of the entire neighborhood overnight without notice and using intimidation to make people comply. And me, I was just the unlucky neighbor in her way. I didn't back down, though this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was personal now. I had to find out what the law said, what the city said, what the real boundaries were, because if someone can block your home with a semi-truck and claim it's legal, where does it stop? And that was only the beginning. A few weeks before all this chaos started, things had been quiet, calm, even. The kind of peace you grow to appreciate after years in the same house. Neighbors waved when passing by, kids rode their bikes down the street, and barbecues happened in backyards during the weekends. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safe. Then she moved in. Karen, as we'd come to know her, bought the house at the end of the street. The corner lot, the one with the big yard and a clear view of the entire block. At first, no one paid her much attention. People waved. She didn't wave back. Someone brought over a welcome basket. She never opened the door. Not rude exactly, just cold. But little things started happening. A note on someone's windshield for parking too close to her curb. A complaint about a kid's basketball hoop being unsightly. And then came the HOA meeting. She showed up to her first HOA meeting like she'd been a member for decades. Not to observe, not to ask questions. She came in with a folder full of complaints, suggestions, and ideas for improvement. Some of the longtime residents tried to be polite. A few rolled their eyes. But she had a way of talking that made you feel like disagreeing wasn't worth the trouble. Always calm, always condescending, like she already decided she was right, and nothing you said mattered. Over the next few weeks, she started becoming more involved with the HOA. Too involved. Suddenly, 2 board members resigned. Then came a special vote, barely announced, poorly attended, and just like that, Karen was on the board, along with 2 of her friends who had moved into the neighborhood around the same time. That's when everything shifted. It wasn't just notes anymore. New rules started showing up in people's mailboxes. Restrictions on what kind of garden tools could be visible from the street. Warnings about non-conforming paint colors, even though those homes had looked the same for years. And the strangest one, a proposed rule to review private access lanes for ownership reassessment. No one really paid attention to that last part. It sounded like legal filler, something that didn't apply to most of us. But Karen wasn't throwing words around just to sound smart. She was laying groundwork. It turns out there's a small patch of road leading to the last row of houses, including mine, that technically isn't city maintained. Most of us assumed it was public property or at least under some kind of shared easement agreement. But Karen saw it as an opportunity. She started claiming that stretch of road was HOA controlled, that we needed permission to use it, that she had plans for how traffic should flow in the neighborhood, and that certain houses, like mine, were violating those plans. No notices, no hearings, just her word and the support of her 2 new board members. And that's when the tension really started. Neighbors began whispering. People started checking their deeds, calling the city, asking questions. Karen, meanwhile, was doubling down, walking up and down the street with a clipboard, snapping photos of people's yards, writing things down. The friendliness that once existed on our block disappeared overnight. And every time someone questioned her, she'd smile that smug little smile and say the same thing. It's just about keeping the neighborhood nice. But we all knew better. This wasn't about neat lawns or paint colors. This was about power. And for whatever reason, Karen had decided that controlling the road to my house was the next piece of her plan. The morning the semi-truck showed up, it didn't come quietly. You could hear the rumble echoing off every house on the block. I remember standing in my kitchen with my coffee, thinking someone must be moving in, or maybe there was construction nearby. But when I stepped outside and saw that massive truck parked sideways across the only road to my driveway, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt deliberate. It was just sitting there. No one inside. No flashing lights. Just a wall of metal across the pavement, blocking not only me, but 3 other homes that shared the same access point. No warning, no explanation, just a blockade. I tried to stay calm. I walked over to see if maybe the driver was nearby, maybe making a delivery, and didn't realize what he was doing. That's when Karen appeared, out of nowhere, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Arms crossed, same expression. Cold, confident. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "That road is no longer for public use. It's HOA property. We're enforcing our rights." I laughed at first because it sounded so ridiculous. Enforcing what? There had been no letters, no discussions, no city documents. Nothing. But she wasn't joking. She stood there like she'd won a game I didn't even know we were playing. Said it was time to set boundaries, and that using the road without HOA permission was a violation. I asked her again, calmly, what legal authority she had to do this. Her response? The board voted. It's official. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was using a truck the size of a small building to physically block families from reaching their own homes, and acting like it was normal, legal even. The kind of thing you'd expect in a movie about a corrupt homeowners association. Not in real life. A few of the other neighbors came out. One of them had their elderly mother inside and was trying to get her to a doctor's appointment. Another needed to get to work. We all stood there, looking at the truck, looking at Karen, and trying to figure out what to do. I called the police. When the officer arrived, Karen was already speaking to him, pointing at a folder filled with papers and diagrams. I could hear her telling him it was private property and that the semi-truck was a temporary enforcement measure. The officer listened, flipping through her documents. Then he turned to me and asked if I had any proof that the road wasn't HOA controlled. I was stunned. I didn't think I needed proof to access my own house. It had never been a question before. But suddenly, I was being asked to justify my right to the road I'd driven on every day for a decade. The cop didn't arrest anyone. He didn't tow the truck. He said it was a civil matter, and that we'd have to take it up with the city or file a claim in court. Karen looked smug. I felt helpless. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a bad neighbor. This was someone who had studied the system, learned its weak spots, figured out how to use confusion and legal gray areas as weapons. And now she had the upper hand. For the rest of that day, no one could leave. No one could get in. Delivery drivers turned around. Uber Eats orders got canceled. An ambulance trying to reach one of the other houses had to go the long way around the block and ended up late. All because one person decided to block a road she didn't even own. After the truck incident, I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just wait around, hoping she'd get bored or move on. She had crossed a line. Blocking someone's access to their home isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. And if she got away with it once, what would she try next? I started by calling the HOA office directly. Not the board members, just the office. The person who picked up sounded nervous the moment I mentioned Karen's name. I asked for documentation about the so-called vote that gave them control over the road. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I'm not sure I'm allowed to share that without board approval." I pressed her, reminded her that I was a homeowner and had a right to know how decisions were being made, especially ones that affected access to my property. She said she'd look into it and call me back. That call never came. So I went to the city next. I drove down to the municipal office, pulled property maps, and asked questions about public versus private road maintenance. Turns out that stretch of pavement was in a weird gray zone, not officially city-owned, not listed as a private drive either. It had been maintained by a builder before the neighborhood was fully developed. Since then, no one claimed responsibility, which meant no one had really fought over it. Until now, I asked the zoning officer straight up, "Can someone just block it with a truck and say it's private?" He shook his head. "Absolutely not," he said. "That would require legal action, documentation, and a whole lot of public notice." So I wasn't crazy. What she did wasn't just wrong. It was probably illegal. Still, no one seemed eager to step in. Everyone passed the responsibility around. City said it was an HOA issue. HOA said it was a board matter. The police said it was civil. Meanwhile, I was still stuck trying to get my house back. Other neighbors started speaking up. Quietly at first. One woman said she tried to complain but got a warning letter for code violations on her lawn. Another man told me Karen had taken pictures of his house at night, claiming he had unauthorized lights installed. People were scared to speak out. Not because they believed Karen was right, but because she was relentless, and the board was backing her every step of the way. I decided to call a lawyer. It wasn't cheap, but it felt necessary. I needed someone who spoke the language of legal documents and loopholes. After explaining everything, the attorney just sat there shaking his head. "This isn't about property," he said. "It's about power. She's testing how far she can go before someone stops her." He helped me draft a formal demand letter addressed to the HOA board, requesting immediate removal of the truck and legal clarification on the road's ownership. He also suggested requesting a special HOA meeting with enough signatures from other homeowners to force it. I printed flyers, knocked on doors, explained what was happening to anyone who would listen. Some neighbors were hesitant at first, but once they heard the full story, once they realized what blocking that road could mean for their access, they started signing. It wasn't easy. Karen had already poisoned the well, whispering that I was anti-community or hostile. But people weren't blind. They saw the truck. They saw the disruption. And slowly, the support started growing. That's when Karen started escalating again. More notices, more veiled threats, and something told me she wasn't done yet. It was around the third day that the neighborhood started waking up, not just to the truck, but to the bigger problem. Everyone had seen Karen's behavior before. The notes, the complaints, the smug way she walked down the street with a clipboard, acting like the entire block was her personal kingdom. But the truck, that was different. That was real. That was physical. And it affected everyone, not just me. People started talking, quietly at first, over fences at the end of driveways, through text messages and group chats. One neighbor said his Amazon packages hadn't arrived for 2 days. Another said their elderly mother's home nurse had to cancel because she couldn't get through. It wasn't just a personal inconvenience anymore. It was a disruption, and it was spreading. I heard that a group of neighbors had gone to Karen's house the night before to try and talk. She didn't answer the door. Her porch light turned on, then off again. The truck still sat there the next morning, unmoved, like a monument to her authority. That's when things shifted. A few of us decided to hold a small gathering, nothing formal, just a chance to talk face to face and share what we knew. We met in a neighbor's garage with folding chairs and cold sodas. That night, for the first time in a long time, the street felt like a community again. We shared emails, documents, stories. A woman from 2 houses over revealed that Karen had been taking pictures of her children playing outside, claiming it was evidence of improper play equipment. One guy, quiet, older, kind, said he'd lived here since the first homes were built. He had a drawer full of original HOA maps and papers. He brought them to the meeting and unfolded them on a workbench. That's when it became clear. The road wasn't listed under the HOA's property at all. Not once. Not anywhere. It was like finding a key. And suddenly, people were fired up. The group decided to form a small committee. Not an official counter-HOA or anything dramatic, just a group of residents who would document, fact-check, and share information. We created a shared folder online with everything we could find: maps, bylaws, Karen's flyers, email threads. We wanted to be prepared. If she wanted a power game, we were going to play it smarter, not louder. We also drafted a petition, not just for the special HOA meeting my lawyer recommended, but for a full review of board actions taken in the last 60 days. Because if Karen and her friends had pushed through that road control policy, what else had they done without transparency? Signatures rolled in faster than we expected. Meanwhile, Karen stayed quiet. She stopped walking the street. No more notes, no more clipboard, but we knew she was watching. We saw her blinds move. We saw her porch camera light flash on when people walked by. She hadn't given up. She was regrouping. Then came the warning letters. 3 houses, including mine, received identical envelopes marked notice of noncompliance. They claimed we were in violation of HOA rules for unauthorized gatherings and use of unapproved materials on common areas. One of the unapproved materials, the flyers we handed out for the petition. It was petty, but it was also a warning. Still, no one backed down. If anything, it brought more people to our side. More signatures, more volunteers. People who'd been silent for months were finally saying, enough. It wasn't about lawns or fences anymore. It was about control. And nobody wanted to live in fear of a neighbor with too much power and a personal agenda. It didn't take long for Karen to realize the neighborhood wasn't scared anymore. Her usual tactics, intimidation, vague threats, bending the rules, weren't working the way they used to. People had seen the truck. They'd seen how far she was willing to go. And now, with signatures collected and old documents resurfacing, the power she thought she had started to slip. But she wasn't done. Not even close. A few days after the petition was finalized, a strange letter appeared in everyone's mailbox. No envelope, just a printed sheet with the HOA letterhead at the top, though something about it looked off. The font wasn't the same. The margins were strange. It almost looked like a template someone had downloaded and edited themselves. Still, it was official enough that some neighbors took it seriously. The letter claimed that due to ongoing disruptions, the HOA board was suspending all non-emergency homeowner gatherings until further notice. It also stated that any discussion of HOA matters without board approval was considered unauthorized use of HOA channels. Basically, she was trying to silence the entire neighborhood. People were angry. A few started asking who had approved the letter. Others compared it with past HOA communications, and sure enough, the formatting didn't match. The signature at the bottom wasn't from the property manager. It was from Karen herself. This time, the pushback was immediate. One neighbor, a retired paralegal, took the letter straight to the property management company. They hadn't seen it. They hadn't approved it. In fact, they said they were concerned about how Karen had been operating lately and were looking into several complaints. That was a turning point. It was the first time someone outside the neighborhood acknowledged what we'd been dealing with. Meanwhile, the truck was still there. By now, the story had started to spread. A local community blog picked up the situation. They ran a piece titled, "When HOA Power Goes Too Far," with a blurry photo of the semi-truck sitting like a barricade at the end of the street. That article was shared dozens of times. Then a local reporter called me. She wanted to hear my side, and I gave it to her, all of it. The next day, she showed up with a cameraman. Nothing dramatic, no news van, just a quiet interview on my porch. Karen must have seen it because she came outside 5 minutes later, arms crossed, hovering like she was waiting for her moment to speak. The reporter politely asked if she wanted to give her side. Karen declined. Instead, she stood behind the camera, glaring. Later that night, the truck disappeared. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. Gone. It was the first time in weeks I'd been able to leave my driveway without weaving through yards or backing out a block in reverse. But even with the truck gone, we knew the fight wasn't over. The special HOA meeting we'd requested was approaching. The board had no choice but to acknowledge it now. With over 2/3 of homeowners signing the petition, they were legally required to schedule it. Karen, of course, tried to delay it, claimed procedural errors, sent out confusing emails saying the vote would be informal or non-binding. But no one was falling for it anymore. People were organizing carpools, sharing printouts of rules, reminding each other of the meeting time. It wasn't just about the road or the truck. It was about taking back the voice of the neighborhood, about reminding the board and Karen that homeowners weren't just names on paper. We had rights. And now, finally, we had each other. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening. It was one of those humid nights where the air felt heavy, and everything was tense before it even started. People showed up early, a lot more than usual. Folding chairs filled the room, and those who came late stood along the walls. For once, It wasn't just the usual group of bored homeowners half listening while sipping coffee. This time, everyone was locked in, focused, ready. Karen sat at the front table, flanked by the two other board members she'd brought in months earlier. Her clipboard was there, of course, along with a thick binder that she kept opening and closing like a nervous tick. But she wasn't smiling this time, not like before. She could feel the shift in the room. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. The meeting began with formalities. Roll call, approval of minutes, the usual boring stuff meant to drag things out. But when it came time to address the petition, the reason most of us were there, Karen tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. She started talking about landscaping budgets and long-term planning initiatives. That's when someone from the crowd stood up. He had a firm voice, calm but clear. He said, "We're not here for landscaping. We're here because you blocked a road with a truck and told homeowners they couldn't access their own properties." You could feel the energy shift again. A few people nodded. Someone clapped, but stopped when Karen raised her hand like a teacher scolding a student. She said the board had already reviewed the matter and determined that no official violations occurred. But she didn't provide any evidence. No city documents. No legal opinion. Just more language about interpretation of shared spaces and temporary enforcement actions. That's when people started speaking up, one after another. A woman near the back said her son's medication delivery was delayed because of the truck. A man said his job was threatened because he couldn't get out of his driveway for 2 days. Someone else read a section of the HOA bylaws aloud, one that clearly stated any change to road access or usage had to be approved by a homeowner vote. Karen interrupted, claimed that emergency measures were allowed under board authority. But again, no documentation, no lawyer, just her word. Then someone dropped the real bombshell. It was the neighbor who had found the original developer plans, the ones showing the road wasn't owned or maintained by the HOA at all. He handed copies out to everyone in the room. The papers weren't flashy, just old scans and permits. But they were enough. Enough to prove that the road Karen had claimed as private HOA property wasn't under her control. Never had been. Karen tried to respond, tried to argue that maintenance implied ownership, that the HOA had invested interest in managing the road. But the room wasn't buying it anymore. People had seen the truck. They'd lived through the chaos. Her words couldn't cover that up. Someone motioned for a vote. A formal one. The petition had called not only for a review of her actions, but also for a vote of no confidence in the board. It wasn't spontaneous. We prepared. Ballots were passed out, counted openly, transparent, clean. No shouting, no arguing, just neighbors deciding what kind of community they wanted to live in. And as those ballots piled up, you could see it written all over Karen's face. She wasn't untouchable anymore. When the final vote count was announced, the room went completely still. You could hear the buzz of the overhead lights, the soft creak of someone shifting in their chair, the quiet thud of someone setting their pen down. It was over. The numbers weren't even close. An overwhelming majority had voted for her removal, along with 2 of her board allies. Just like that, the power she'd clung to so tightly slipped right through her fingers. She didn't speak, didn't argue, just sat there blinking. Her mouth opened like she might say something, but no words came out. One of the remaining board members politely asked her to step down from the table. She stood up slowly, clutching that thick binder to her chest like a life raft. Then she turned and walked out without looking at anyone. No one clapped. No one jeered. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a release. A slow breath everyone in the room had been holding for far too long. People started gathering their things, talking softly, some shaking hands, others just standing there, taking it all in. There was no celebration, but something about the silence felt louder than anything else. In the days that followed, things began to shift. The semi-truck never returned. The HOA management company issued a statement clarifying the board's authority and apologized for the confusion caused by the incident. They also promised increased oversight and transparency going forward. They scheduled a follow-up meeting to begin electing new board members, this time through a proper vote with candidate bios, public Q and as, and ballots mailed to every homeowner. But the most noticeable change wasn't in paperwork or procedures. It was in the people. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly talking across driveways, waving from their porches, helping one another out again. One guy started a group chat to keep everyone informed about board matters. Another offered to help mow lawns for older residents who couldn't do it themselves. It felt normal again, the way neighborhoods are supposed to feel. I even ran into the man with the original maps one morning while walking my dog. He smiled and said, "Funny how one truck can bring a whole neighborhood together." And he was right. That truck wasn't just a blockade. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that silence gives people like Karen power, but unity takes it back. She didn't disappear, though. Karen still lives at the end of the street. Her blinds are closed more often now. She doesn't walk the neighborhood with her clipboard anymore, and no one's seen her handing out notices or calling in violations. She stays quiet, probably watching, maybe waiting. But this time, she knows the difference. She knows the street is watching back. It's strange how quickly things can change. How one act of overreach, one bad decision can unravel months or years of control. But it also shows how strong people can be when they decide they've had enough. When they realize they have a voice and that they don't have to be afraid to use it. The truth is, the road was never hers. The power was never hers. It belonged to the community, the people who live there, the families who call it home. And once that became clear, once the silence broke and the truth was passed from one house to another, nothing she did could stop it. What started as a quiet morning with a cup of coffee turned into something no one saw coming. But in the end, the people stood up, not with shouting, not with anger, but with calm persistence. And sometimes that's all it takes,